Hey everyone, how you doing? This is Niall from NoCode.Tech and I'm here with Prakash Chandran from Xano. Now, Xano is a tool that I've been really excited to talk about here. It's one that I've worked with Prakash and the team on for a while, sort of giving some of my views and feedback on the tool. And as I'm sure Prakash is going to tell us in a minute, I think over the last few months, the way the tool's growing and the company around it's growing has been really fascinating and interesting. So Prakash, thanks very much for coming, and why don't you start by telling us a wee bit about Xano and what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So now, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. We're big fans of you, of NoCode.Tech, and it was so cool to work with you a little bit last year, really ahead of our launch. So definitely props to you. It's also awesome to see everything that you're doing for the no-code community. So Xano, we like to say is the fastest way to build a scalable backend for your web or your mobile application. And when we say the back end, we mean strictly the back end. We're only focused on the back end. We're front end agnostic. So we basically give you a scalable server, a very flexible and powerful database, and most importantly, a no code API builder that allows you to define your business logic and then connect it to the front end of your choice.
Awesome. I love that. And how long has the company been around?
Yeah, so we technically launched to the public in January of this year. But that being said, Xano was previously an internal tool at a development agency, an app development agency, for almost 10 years. So imagine 10 years ago, us wanting to say, hey, you know what? We want to take on more clients, but we don't want to have to grow our team. And we're also noticing this pattern where a lot of the applications we're building are the same. So how do we build a tool that helps us build faster without spending more money? So the first version of Xano was born almost a decade ago. And then just through iterations, it's gotten better and better and better. And then almost about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit more than that, is when I came on board and I was like, look, we have something special here. Let's productize this. Let's bring it to the market. And let's take this capability of building backends without compromise, scalable backends without compromise, and let's give it to the public. And so that's kind of the history and the lore of where Xano came from. And just two more things about that. I always kind of tell that story for two reasons. One is to tell you that even though we're relatively new in the market, we've been around for a long time and we're not going to go anywhere. You can trust us to build your application on. The second reason is because we're battle tested. Over hundreds of applications have been built on us, small, large, enterprise, IoT, et cetera. Xano's been able to handle everything. So we like to say we are Turing complete, which means that anything that you can define in a programming language, you can define within Xano. And so, we welcome you to come and try out your most complex business logic with us, and we'll be able to take care of you.
Yeah, and I totally love that bit. Like people are always talking to me about the limitations of no code and this whole idea of the 80-20 problem of you can do 80% of what you want, but you got to code the last 20%. And the answer to
Yeah.
that is Xano. I mean, you literally can build anything. And for anyone watching who doesn't know what Turing completeness means, it is this idea that like Xano is so advanced that you could build Xano in Xano, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. And so as you mentioned, you've been around as a company now for 10 years. Obviously, you're really, battle tested. I think you mentioned you came on about a year and a half ago. You sort of said, we've got something great here, let's really take it and run with it. What did the product look like then versus now? And what have been some of the kind of challenges that came up when you kind of went from this is an agency thing to this could be a next big, no code product?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. So first of all, it was very much, as I mentioned, an internal tool before in every shape and every definition of the word. So as an internal tool, it was a command line interface. And so you would basically type it in. It was like schema centric, basically usable by no one except for our CEO, Sean Montgomery. So the first challenge was really saying, how do we put together an interface that kind of allows people to do everything to address all of the nuances beyond that 80-20 that you were just talking about, but still kind of be approachable and friendly, especially thinking about this no code movement that's happening and only getting bigger. We wanted to play in this space, but we wanted to remove that kind of stigma that, hey, only use no code for your MVP. So the first part about that was building an interface, which, to be honest, is still evolving with feedback and as we learn more about our customers and how to do things better. And the second part of that was almost restructuring things from the ground up. So it wasn't just basically an internal agency tool that we just put a skin on, but we actually refactored everything to where every single person that was coming into Xano was on their own instance that could be scalable. So they could not only build their MVP with us, but scale to the moon if they wanted to. So those two challenges were something that we really wanted to address. And the user interface piece of it, like abstracting away that complexity and making it approachable to people, is a journey that we will always be on.
I love that. It's really, really cool. And I think you guys have come a long way with that, right? I mean, obviously you're taking care of the back end, you're connected to lots of different front ends, and I feel like, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, I feel like every single week I bump into someone who's just started working in Xano, they've started a new partnership. I think the amount of visibility and hype that you guys have built up, really just over the last few months since you sort of publicly launched, it's been really, really impressive, and there's been a lot of fanfare. And so, I guess you and I, as I mentioned at the very start of this interview, you and I worked together on sort of, what could Xano look like, and I sort of drew in my no-code experience, and you guys had years and years experience working on lots of different products. So, clearly things have moved on a lot since then. What's it been like, kind of, I guess growing the company into 2021? What's changed, for example, in the last 7 months? Where are you now versus where you were?
Sure. So I'll kind of just talk about our experience working together. We were, it's been such a privilege to be able to work with you because you have such a good understanding of the no code space, all of the different tools, and also what's needed. How do we help people? And because you always, every single day, you have new entrants into the no code community. So how do we get them successful faster? So we had none of this context when we started working with you. So I think that you gave us a good idea of like, look, there's this abstracted layer. Like you have to be able to really abstract away the complexity to give people the same power, but not necessarily confuse them with all of the nuance that can come with building a complex, scalable backend. So we've really taken that to heart, and we have plans and a roadmap that basically cover some of the things that we've discussed that we're still continuing to execute on. But I would say from the time that we've launched up till now, I think there are two things that we've really tried to do. And I think this is why a lot of people are talking about us. Number one is that we made a concerted effort to say, look, just because we're in the no code community, it doesn't mean that there's no complexity to the things that people are building. And I think this is a really important point because, as you've said, so many tools come with constraints, come with limitations, but what makes a certain person's app unique is that 20%, right? It's the nuance. Making simple applications for people usually requires complexity in the backend because the backend handles all the heavy lifting. So we always said we wanted to make sure that we didn't move away from that. And a piece of this was not using non-like coding language. We wanted to instead of like renaming things to like workflows or things of that nature, we wanted to be transparent around, look, we live in a world that is run by APIs, by databases, but let's really try to educate people. And as you've seen, Niall, like we've been like slamming our YouTube channel with educational content. We're serious about office hours and orientation. We run them like 2 to 3 times a week, constantly educating people on the power of all these things. And I think it's through that education, people are realizing, wow, there's a way that I can understand the world around me. So when that zap doesn't exist, or when I run into these constraints, I now have the power using a tool like Xano to go the distance. So between the time we launched in January to now, that's kind of what we've been focused on and really helping educate our users to build without limits.
Yeah, no, I totally see that, and that was something I was going to call out the amount of educational content you guys have been putting out there. The amount of times I've seen Michael's face explaining something, all sorts of emails and stuff like. It's really impressive volume, especially given you guys are such a small team. It comes across really well that you guys are so focused in that, and you touched on something there around about constraints. Um, the power of Xano, of course, is that there are no constraints, and quite often the power of different tools that maybe have a more focused model is because of that lack of constraints. There is a lot less to learn, and I think that yes, okay, there's a trade off there with a learning curve with a tool like Xano or tools in a similar class, but I like that you guys have decided to embrace that and actually like you were talking about workflows and stuff. You and I talked about that many months ago, and we debated that back and forth. And at the time, I would have probably said I don't know if that works, but now I see a lot of people who I wouldn't have thought were very technical, and I see them talking about Xano and using Xano, and I think just not being intimidated by Xano, and I think that's a big thing. Like it's easy to see APIs and databases and think, oh no, where's my canvas? I want to drag some components in, but actually, I'm really impressed by how much people are like, this is brilliant. I'm going to dive in here. It's going to let me do whatever I want. Um, and so, I guess that probably leads on to the next question. Who is using Xano and how are they finding it?
Yeah. So we have a couple classes of users. The first that I'll say is I'd like to call them they're like the technical entrepreneur. So these are people typically that are coming from a background at a tech company. They have a good understanding of databases, APIs, but they're not necessarily programmers themselves. So when they want to start their own business or whatever project they're working on, they're kind of sick of the traditional method of hiring a team of developers to do it. So enter the no code space. And so they want to kind of build without that constraint. So they usually come to find us. The second cohort of people, and this is actually a massive demographic of ours, is kind of that no code enthusiast, right? So these are people that are typically graduating from other tools. So they'll start in something like an app sheet or an Airtable, and they'll kind of tinker around, and then they'll kind of hit this wall and be like, whether it be a record limit or a business logic limit, they'll say there has to be something else here to help me solve this problem, because that's at the end of the day, all these applications help people solve problems to build applications to present to the world. So we'll have a lot of these no code enthusiasts that will graduate into us, hearing about us through Twitter or one of the other front end tools. The final cohort is kind of the people that are building for other people. So these are agencies, these are individual consultants that want to build faster, want to kind of launch faster so they can take on more clients, again, without growing their team. This is that use case that we literally solve for ourselves with Xano. And so we're seeing a lot of people come on board for that. The final cohort that's actually kind of surprising, we're actually seeing a lot of developers. So normally you would see developers like poo-poo the no-code space and say like, they'll never kind of reach any modicum of complexity or nuance that is required that a programming language can handle. But we still have a lot of developers that are just like, look, if this can build my API endpoints, give me a scalable server, and save me like hours and hours of time from hand rolling it, why wouldn't I want to use it? And we're seeing that more and more. So that's been exciting too.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting, and it's interesting what you're saying about developers. I definitely feel like for the first time in a very long time, I'm starting to see that sentiment shift. I mean, it's definitely not huge. Bubble had an article on Hacker News the other day about the fundraise that they've just had, and it was literally about 200 comments of developers just ripping no-code tools to bits. Although more of a debate probably than usual, about the virtues of no-code. But yeah, over the years, something I've said to a lot of people, and I've probably said this to you as well, is I've very rarely seen visual development tools aimed at developers actually work. They usually find they're too constrained or something like that. And so, to see the sentiment start to shift, I definitely notice that in the market, but it's great to see that Xano's, achieving that. And I think at the end of the day, it's about finding the right abstraction, as we talk about. Clearly you guys have built something that developers find actually speeds them up rather than slowing them down. And that's great.
Yeah. And another thing I want to make clear is like we always want to cater to all of that nuance and complexity that are required for building these amazing applications that people are putting out. But we will always be on the journey of abstraction and education. Those are probably two of the most important words for us, because abstracting away the complexity to where it's very approachable to build something is very important. Equally important that you know exactly what's happening. What is the abstraction actually doing? Because the more you understand about how the engine works, the better decisions that you're going to make about the application that you're building and launching to the public.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And are you guys finding it, you know, is it difficult, do you find, to allow access to all that complexity without also taking away the ease of use? You know, are you finding that as you start to build features that make Xano easier to use, you know, is it starting to lock away the complexity? Is it becoming more complicated, or actually is there a nice balance between flexibility and usability?
No, that's always a challenge. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think, you always want to make things easier, but you have to ask yourself, okay, well, at what cost are we like abstracting away too much of this? So I think, my sense of it is that there's always going to be, or there always needs to be the ability to treat users as quote unquote grown-ups, right? They understand that Xano is a tool that can handle every single complexity. It's Turing complete. So we generally will trust them to say, look, you may not want to start with Xano. Maybe you'll start with Airtable. And that's amazing. We love all these no-code tools. Believe me, like we're really. So it's really about, I always tell people, start with the tool that you feel the most comfortable with. At the end of the day, you're building a business or something to solve a problem for a set of users. And however you can express that and get that out the door, use the tool that's comfortable. However, almost like 9 times out of 10, they'll run into this thing where they're like, you know what? Now I'm going to take this a little bit more seriously, that I've like had some time to play around. I want something to build without really the handcuffs, without the limits. And that's why I say people graduate into us. So we're okay right now being the tool that you have to know a little bit more about. That being said, we will never stop trying to educate and abstracting away the complexity without sacrificing that ability to build in that nuance that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and I like the way you kind of talk about that sort of graduation. You know, I think we tend to think about this no code spectrum as being, you know, no code, low code, and code, and maybe, you know, arguably there's a part in the end of like zero code, you know, stuff like Airtable or Google Sheets, which isn't really coding, but you can use it for that. Um, it sounds almost like there are different shades of no code as well. You know, like there's tools like let's say Adalo and Glide, for example, that I usually judge as being really accessible. And then before you get to low code, it's almost like there's tools like yourselves in there. I mean, how do you guys see that? Do you think the graduation? Do you see yourself as low code, or do you think you're somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think low code typically means that, from what my understanding of it, is that even if it allows you to express things in a no code way, you still have to understand the underlying architecture. And so we probably do see ourselves as more of a low code tool, aspiring to be no code. And that is why this education and abstraction piece is so important to us, because we understand that there's just nuance to these things. But we also understand on the other side of that, that this nuance is necessary. So let me give you a simple example that we actually ran the other day. So let's say, for example, you're working with a Star Wars API. You're building an app in, let's say, Adalo to look up planets, right? And lo and behold, there's a Star Wars API, which is amazing. It has like planets and people and vehicles. It's so great. However, that API doesn't allow you to search for a planet by name. It only allows you to search for it by ID. And what kind of user experience is that? Can you imagine telling someone, hey, look up a Star Wars planet by some random ID that I'm going to give you? So Tatooine maybe is like ID number 1. These are the real world problems that people run into. You'll maybe find the data you're looking for, no pun intended, but it's not going to be in the format that you want. And so you need tools like Xano in the world to help transform it and make it work for you. And we're okay being the tool that does that, because we're helping unblock innovation, right? or unblock the barriers to innovation, I should say. And so our whole goal is like, maybe we're in the low code world now, but we will always aspire to make it as easy as possible. And you'll see this over the next 6 to 12 months. We have a lot of exciting things on our roadmap that's going to make it even easier. And soon enough, it's really just going to be a couple clicks and you'll be able to build the most complex and nuanced of application, but you'll also be able to dive into the details if you want.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love that. And I never knew you were such a Star Wars fan, but now I'm noticing like the Star Wars in the background. I mean, and that was a pretty that was a pretty good pun off the top of your head. But no, I think you're spot on. And one of the things I find really interesting in this whole world is, over at NoCode.Tech and at No Code University, we talk about these kind of four fundamental skills that people need to learn to use No Code, and I talk about those being databases, UI, UX, workflows, so logic, if statements, etc., and then of course APIs and integrations. And I think the APIs and integrations bit is debatably the most important. You can have different levels of understanding of how workflows. You might get an if statement, but a look might be beyond you, and that's fine. You can still build software. But I think when you learn to work with APIs, when you get to the point that you can go read an API's documentation and do something with it, it just unlocks so much, because now you can truly manipulate the digital world. You can access anything out there. There probably is a Star Wars API. And I think
Yeah.
what's going to become really interesting is how tools like Xano and others can make APIs just more accessible to people. And that actually brings me on to one of the things I was going to mention. We've talked a lot about the sort of complex things that Xano can do, and just how far you can go with it. But one of the things that I'm pretty pleased to see with Xano that I don't often see in tools who are kind of as new to the market as you guys is you've got a marketplace. And so, tell us a little bit about how that works. In my head, I sort of look at Xano, I think, okay, there's a lot of like technical people coming in and using this who are going to understand APIs, but what's on your marketplace? Do people use it a lot? And is that going to be like a big part for you to grow soon, or is it not as important?
Oh, it's absolutely important. And we have some exciting launches that are coming up that I can talk about kind of very broadly. But I think for right now, what the marketplace is a place where you can stand on the shoulders of giants, as it were, or other people that have built, and basically leverage the work that they've already done. So right now, we just have very simple marketplace items that, for example, will give you things like Google authentication or Facebook authentication out of the box. There's all this nuance and business logic that you normally have to do to implement that into an application. So we wanted to remove that. Then you kind of have different categories of these marketplace extensions. Some might be like WebSockets. And for those people that don't know what WebSockets are, they're basically a way to communicate real-time data with your front end. So think about like an Uber type application. When the car is moving, you want to see where that car is right now. That's real-time application handled in WebSockets. So we basically have ways to do that. Stripe for payments, Twilio and SendGrid for mailing. So we're basically checking the boxes off just on the basics for right now. We also have fully functional backends that you could just install and get ready to use. So for example, if you're building a two-sided marketplace like Airbnb for name your scenario, you can actually install this marketplace extension, and it comes with the database tables, API endpoints, and business logic to get you started. So that's kind of what's there today, but it's really just the primer. It's just the beginning. The next thing that we are launching is the ability for people to basically become citizen developers. We've had tons of Xano users that say, hey, we want to build functions for people or even for ourselves, and we want to make money by selling these complex backends to other people. So that is currently in the works and should be launched soon. And then the third thing is think about something like CodePen, for example. You're able to share code snippets very easily with people. Can you imagine doing something similar like that to the backend? Like I want to build out this whole complex process and share it with a link. That's something that we are just imminently about to launch as well. So we have all these different things that we're currently working on. That's just going to make it easier and easier. And again, it democratizes the ability for people to learn and understand how things are going. In our office hours, sometimes we'll work a problem that someone is working out with building their API, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I could just like have this and capture it and save it to my my workspace." Well, we're going to be able to allow them to do that and many more people. So we're really excited about the evolution of this marketplace and where we're headed.
Yeah, I love that. That's really, really cool. And it's, it's a really good example of, like, if you're a coder, you have all these developer tools and you've got stuff like GitHub and all this infrastructure out there that no coders just don't have yet. So really exciting to see you kind of push forward with that. And kind of speaking of infrastructure and scale and related topics, so you've kind of talked a little bit about how Xano can scale so far. You've talked about his battle hardened, etc. And I think you used the phrase Xano can scale without compromise. That it's something a lot of people, even people who haven't started building an app yet, one of the things they worry about is, am I going to spend lots of time building this in no code and then I'm going to get 100 users, or I'm going to get a TechCrunch article and a million people show up in a day and it's going to fall over? When you say scale without compromise, what does that mean? Is that true? How far can you actually go?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this is part of one of the challenges in the beginning of like really rethinking how we build this infrastructure. And in many ways, we actually held back on launching the product because we had to figure out all of the nuances around building the right infrastructure to scale without compromise. So let me talk a little bit about what that means. Currently, especially in the no code world, you'll kind of have like loose definitions of what infrastructure might be. Maybe it's called capacity, maybe it's called generally space, or things of that nature. If you look at Xano.com and look at our technology, you'll see we're very transparent about our technology stack that helps you scale. So what is that? Well, we're hosted on Google Cloud. We use Postgres, which is the most powerful open source database in the world, which you can scale horizontally and vertically. We use Kubernetes to orchestrate. So as you scale, it automatically will orchestrate where resources go. And all of this is provisioned on a Docker container. So for the more novice users that are listening to this, they're not going to understand what any of that means. But what they should take away is that it's built using best infrastructure practices. And in fact, our CEO was the lead DevOps on Google Photos. So it literally started with the server on his desk and set the foundation to what exists today. And so you have that in the DNA of our company. And we also provide, as you get into, for example, our dedicated plans, you have single tenant infrastructure, which is something that we're very proud to offer that not a lot of services do, which basically means as you scale, even if someone else on Xano is like scaling to the moon and getting lots of traffic, your instance isn't going to be touched at all. And we can auto scale things up and down based on your demand. And so, truly, even before we launched Xano to the public, we were able to scale to massive enterprise organizations in California where we are. And so we're very confident in the fact that we're able to handle whatever you can throw at us.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. And there's a lot of complicated words in there, but as someone who's been both an engineer and a no coder, I can, attest that is a pretty serious setup. And, something I want to touch on there actually, most people I speak to who are, founding no code companies or tools or this kind of thing, they tend to be really, really technical. I feel like I almost always speak to, engineers who, I mean, at the end of the day, right, no code tools are incredibly complex code. It's code that builds code. That's again mind-boggling. But I believe I'm right in saying you're not an engineer by trade, are you? You've got a slightly different background. Can you tell us a little bit about what were you doing before Xano? What is your skill set?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a designer, a user experience designer by trade. So I spent almost 8.5 years at Google working on things like Google Calendar and G Suite or Google Workspace. They keep changing the name. I spent years as a designer. And then I went off and I was an entrepreneur of my own. I started my own company. So that kind of gave me a little bit of the, I guess, the business chops, the entrepreneurial startup chops. And now being in a tool like Xano, I actually think it gives me a little bit of a superpower because I'm able to have my feet in both worlds. Like I can kind of speak the engineering speak, but I would never call myself an engineer. But I can also empathize with users that don't understand because guess what? I was there as well. And in many cases, I'm still there. Like I'm still learning, right? And so I think that my background as this designer, and what is user experience design? It's really about making the user successful faster in a delightful way. So I'm taking those principles and I'm trying to apply it to Xano. And over time, I hope that we can tell that same story when people start to use us for building their backends.
Awesome. I love that. Really, really interesting career and super interesting to hear that I use products every day that you worked on. That's really, really cool. Um, and so, you've told us a lot about Xano. You've teased a couple of times that there's a lot to come in the kind of next 6 to 12 months. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What we're going to see next?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that you can probably look forward to is the marketplace stuff that I was talking about, the ability to really easily share things. And why you should be excited about this is because over time, especially, we have thousands of users now, they're going to be creating these shareable little links that you can learn from. Even if you're not building an application, you can learn about the business logic of what it takes to build very simple or complex workflows. So that's kind of the first piece of it. The second piece is this journey of abstraction that I've talked about. You're going to see our UI really start to improve and evolve over the next 6 to 8 months. We definitely will not sacrifice on that nuance that I was talking about, but we're going to make it even easier for people that don't necessarily understand as much technical detail as it takes to really get the most out of Xano. And the third thing is we're introducing even more technical features that you get from engineering or the best practices in building infrastructure into Xano. So for example, we just introduced this thing called data caching or Redis caching. A lot of people don't know what that is. They may never even have a need for it. But imagine a world where, for example, the Star Wars API example, every time you hit that API, even though it's giving you the same 10 planets back, every time you hit that API, it was going to cost you 5 cents. Well, if you only have a handful of users, maybe that doesn't make a difference. But as you get to millions of users, every time they hit that API, wow, that's going to cost you some money, right? So with Redis data caching, you can actually store those results for, like, let's just call it a month. And then because the planets aren't really going to change, you never have to hit the source API again. You can just basically store that in memory. So things like that, we want to make accessible and understandable to the no code community. One of my favorite things is when a no code person says to me things like, hey, would like data caching help with this? Because I know that they've leveled themselves up, right? And the reality is you have to learn about this. How else are you going to solve the problem? So we want to be the ones to educate you.
Yeah, I love that, and we talked a little bit about scaling, but it's kind of back in that topic a bit, and I think we tend to think about scaling as being this very black and white thing. You can either handle X amount of users or you can't, but scaling so much more than that, right? If you have 5 users and they hit an API a million times, that's the same as having a million users hit an API once. It's the same level of scale, but a completely different way of thinking about it. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people struggle to conceptualize it that way. And so when no code gets this rep of, oh, it's for MVPs and you can't build real production grade software on it, not many people, to my mind, I've not heard many people talk about they're introducing a caching layer and anything like that. It feels like scale is not just something that you guys are like, oh yeah, we can kind of do this. Don't worry, it'll be fine. It really is core to what you do. And actually, I think could usher in a new stage of no code. Where it starts to become recognised as genuinely scalable, and it starts to be Xano starts to become one of the first tools that people can actually build a huge, huge business on. It's really exciting.
That's the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the future is pretty bright for Xano and people who use Xano. But, as somebody quite involved in the no code space, what do you kind of see the future of the no code movement or the no code industry itself being? What do you see coming up?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and there's kind of this big Gartner report that everyone quotes about the number of tools that will be built with no code. And it kind of, I guess, is related to this. But I think the shift that you're going to start to see is that, the no code space, I think in the beginning was all about making things as dead simple as possible. However, at the sacrifice of the complexity and the nuance that is required to build amazing applications, which is unfortunately, not really unfortunately, but I think that's why there's this stigma that you should only use no code to build your MVP. And it's not just us that will usher in, I think, this new age, but you're going to see a lot of no code tools start to level up when it comes to the things that they can do because people require them. The people that are building amazing applications and big businesses are going to need this nuance. So, for example, or I guess what I'd like to say is that no code is going to evolve from no code to the nuance of even potentially low code, but more about like these no code tools are going to enable you to do more. And I promise within the next like 8 to 12 months, you're going to see this happening more and more. And you see it already. Like Bubble, I promise you, with that 100 million bucks, they're only going to add more and more features to address that nuance that we talked about. Adalo, 8 million bucks. They're going to do the same thing. We were in many cases, we're talking to a lot of these different front end providers, and we know that they're leveling up on their capacities, right? Their capacity to handle all of these nuanced edge cases, because more and more people are coming to the no code space. They're going to have that expectation that they're going to be able to do everything. And so I think that's what I can anticipate for not only the rest of this year, but moving forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think that's the thing. I think a lot of people saw no code boom in sort of 2018, 2019, and I mean it's only really continued to get momentum since then. But I think the difference is back then, Adalo was just starting to come out, Stacker was just coming out, Bubble was
Yeah.
still kind of finding its feet in this new no code movement. Now what you're seeing is incredible amounts of money being pumped in, and I think the thing I say a lot is, I have never seen any industry related to tech or any niche or segment of tech move as fast as no code. I mean, as you know, I do a newsletter every 2 weeks rounding up the best no code tools that I've seen, and it's not enough. There's a couple of times we've had to do an extra issue that's just like, I know we usually give you free tools, but here's like 6 or 12 or something like that, because there are
Yeah.
so many. The pace of innovation, the pace of releases is incredible. So awesome, brilliant. And one other thing I wanted to ask you, that we try and ask at the end of all these interviews, you know, what are 2 or 3 things that you wish that you knew before you started your entrepreneurship journey, and what would you have done differently if you'd known them already?
Yeah, I think this is stated by many people, but I think just 2 things. It's okay to go slow. It's okay to really get a handle on things, because even if you're moving at a non-traditional pace or the pace that a VC might frown upon, you need to basically feel comfortable in what you're building and prove to yourself that it actually has value and worth. And sometimes that is clouded by what everyone else is doing. So the first thing is to certainly move a little bit slower. And this is related, but the second thing is to be really measured about and honest with yourself. And these are 2 major lessons that I've learned. I think that sometimes entrepreneurs, understandably, have an unreasonable expectation for how fast they can change the world, which is totally amazing. But the reality is it happens over nights, over years sometimes. And incremental progress is what's important, and measuring that incremental progress and adjusting and refining and refining and refining is what's the most important thing. And so I would say that is probably, if I had like, something that I have like really learned, it's that. And I'm just pulling up this quote that I heard the other day that I think encompasses it. It's not about winning and losing. It's actually about trying and learning. And I think even though this might sound cliche, moving slow, trying, iterating, and not giving up and being measured about it, I think is the most important lesson that I wish I would have really, really made sure that I understood when I got started out as an entrepreneur.
I love that. Thanks very much, Prakash. Thank you very much. And if the audience want to find out a bit more about yourself or about Xano, where should they go?
Yeah, I would say probably the place where we're most active is on Twitter. So you could go to twitter.com/NoCodeBackend. You can also check out Xano.com/NoCode, just to kind of look at all of our capabilities and how to get started. You can also send me an email directly. I'm Prakash@Xano.com. Our team is super hands-on. We want to make sure you're successful. And even if you're using other tools, but just want to understand these concepts a little bit better, reach out. I'm happy to help. If you're successful, that means that other people will be successful, and it'll all kind of circle back around. So we try to help as many people as we can.
Brilliant, love that. And for the audience listening or watching, if you're watching the video, if you've listened to this, and hopefully if you don't already know much about APIs, you're understanding how big and impactful they can be, highly recommend on our No Code University. We've actually used Xano to show you what APIs are, how to read the documentation, how to go and build your own API. So I recommend checking that out. And if like me, you like the sound of Xano, you want to check it out, then the educational content they've got is absolutely amazing. Prakash is right; they take it really, really seriously. High quality stuff. So go and check it out. So Prakash, thank you very much for your time. It's been great hearing about your experiences and about how Xano's growing. And we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here now. Thank you.
Cheers.